Welcome to the Gold Podcast, news and commentary from Gun Owners Action League, your leading voice for the Massachusetts gun owner.
I'm Jeff. Across the table is Garrett.
What's up, man?
We're in July. It's going to be July. This is going to release on July 4th.
Freedom Day, yeah.
America's birthday.
America's birthday. I love it. Frank Brownell passed away last week, a few days ago. 1939, 2025, recent president, CEO, chairman of the board of Brownells, of course.
Might have ordered a thing or two from them back in the day.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I financed at least one trip to Hawaii for that guy. But condolences to the Brownell family. He's a long time. I mean, as long as I've been alive, I think he started being in charge over there in like the 80s, you know?
It's been a thing as long as I've known it.
Yeah. So as long as I've been like aware of Brownells, he's been in charge of it. So condolences to the family. Frank Brownell, 1939, 2025.
Earlier this month, the Special Legislative Commission on Emerging Firearms Technology met again. Yeah. And they're scheduled to meet again, I think, in a few weeks. But this time to push forward a set of so-called compromises on behalf of people whose rights they're actively stripping away.
Yeah, compromise to them means we take and you...
It's a compromise between the gun control groups.
Right, yeah.
Co-chair of the board, Kate Lipper-Garabedian, Democrat from the 32nd Middlesex.
We've heard that name before.
Laid out the plan. She and co-chair Senator Michael Moore will draft a final report, supposedly reflecting the committee's majority consensus. And at the next and final meeting, they'll vote to adopt it and submit it to the legislature. While doing so, she praised the wave of support they've received, naming a long list of anti-civil rights gun groups, and of course gave a token mention to the opposition arguments from Jim Wallace, Gun Owners Action League.
Name dropping. Oh, yeah. Those guys, too.
She outlined the specific recommendations she and Moore want to include, centered around almost entirely on microstamping. Modeled after the laws in California and New York, their proposal would direct the state to assess the feasibility and viability of microstamping, which I think that was the point of the commission. But
it's neither feasible nor viable. I can say that with confidence.
But directing the state to assess it, create testing standards for the technology, establish training and licensure for people to service microstamped firearms, write regulations for compliance, mandate all semi-automatic handguns sold in Massachusetts to include microstamping once feasibility is confirmed, appropriate public funds for database upgrades, labs, and research, and impose penalties on manufacturers, dealers, or individuals who don't comply or tamper with the tech.
So all of this reads like it's a foregone conclusion. They're not actually interested in seeing if it would work. They're not actually interested in seeing if it was feasible or viable. They're going to vote to adopt it. They're going to try to implement it, and that's it. They're not really interested in whether or not it will work.
Correct. In sort of the scientific world, it's you tailor your thing to produce the results you want. Mm-hmm. But in reference to smart guns, Lipper-Garabedian did acknowledge that so-called personalized firearms cost about 4 times more to purchase. But her solution, a temporary sales tax exemption to soften the blow, essentially trying to create the market before mandating it for everybody.
So the price goes up by 4 times, but she's going to reduce it by 6.25%.
Until it becomes popular enough. And their thought is,
Genius.
If we force enough people to buy it, more manufacturers will make it and thereby drive down the cost.
But yeah, right.
So they're playing favorites in the market. Now, the question was, where was Senator Michael Moore while all this was read aloud? Because he's proclaimed himself to be a pro-gun guy.
Yeah.
He sat silent, smug, staring at and playing on his phone. When the floor opened up, Moore finally spoke, arguing that, like every part of modern life, technology is evolving, and it's their duty to explore tools that offer more safety. He endorsed the recommendations outright and insisted they don't burden lawful gun owners at all.
Nonsense.
Not at all. He even managed to mention the Bill of Rights, though, only to immediately dismiss it as irrelevant to the proposal. In his words, Massachusetts leading this effort is a good thing. But he also said and I'm going to quote the guy, that incentivizing smart guns is tricky because, quote, it's a firearm. There can be arguments made that we don't want to incentivize the purchasing of a firearm. Close quote.
Great job, pro-gun legislator Michael Moore.
Saying the quiet part out loud. What we'd really rather you do is just not purchase one at all.
Of course, Senator John Keenan backs the proposal as well. He complains it doesn't reduce the total number of guns. A smart gun, he said, doesn't prevent suicide if it's the person's own weapon. His suggestion? Only allow incentives if someone turns in a non-smart gun in the exchange. More control, fewer guns. Yeah, it's hard to even say this stuff with a straight face because it's obvious where they're trying to go with all of it.
Yes, the tax breaks and incentives would only come as conditioned on a gun buyback. And we'll put the quotes around that because those are technically not even legal in Massachusetts.
Trying to manipulate the marketplace into
doing what they're
adoption.
told.
Yeah.
Now, Senator Peter Durant, who is an actual pro-Second Amendment guy, spoke up and he said this is calling it a tale of two technologies. And he supports the smart firearms and tax exemptions along the lines of the testimony that we saw along the BioFire from the representatives from BioFire. Yep. Make it available, make it an option, but not enforced. But he flat out said microstamping isn't ready. His take was to let's see how it plays out in other states before Massachusetts wastes the time and money to implement something that either doesn't work or is going to get shot down in legal issues.
But the guy behind the curtain, don't talk to the man behind the curtain. Our good friend Todd Lizotte, remember that name from when we first brought this up? He is on the commission, and he's the owner of the technology that the commission is trying to get implemented.
He's a voting member of the commission.
A voting member. He used his speaking time to position himself as a misunderstood visionary. He lamented that groups like NRA and NSSF have sued him in the past instead of bringing him in for professional consultations, and that this process puts the pressure and burden on him to succeed and prove the technology the commission wants will work. Regarding smart guns, he mentioned that he bought 2 smart guns from BioFire 2 years ago and still hasn't received them, though he's excited. His dream is to leave a legacy, but let's be pretty clear, he stands to profit hugely, massively if he votes for Massachusetts to adopt these mandates because he owns the technology. It's taxpayer money funding the very R&D that his company should be paying for. He should be the one footing the bill, not us, to see if his technology meets the spec.
Yeah, he's angling for law enforcement, federal and military contracts, which costs a lot of money in research and development to prove all the things that he's claiming. So that he has tested on his personal firearm that he's maybe fired 500 rounds through.
So if he gets, if he gets all of this data from state mandates, then he can use that to bolster his federal contract.
We will become the beta testers, and our tax dollars will pay for it. Yeah. Now, Jake McGuigan, who friend of Goal, wasn't having it with Lizotte and called it out directly. Lizotte's personal beef with the NSSF for not acting as a clearinghouse for his technology is completely ludicrous. He said that this is a guy who's never sat for a deposition, even when he's supposed to have been deposed in multiple court cases around the country, and by his own admission has a blatant conflict of interest while serving as a voting member on the commission. McGuigan pointed out correctly that the commission clearly cherry-picked pro-micro-stamping testimony with the sole exception of Jim Wallace from Goal. Co-chair Kate,
not Karen.
Immediately cut him off, claiming that they definitely reached out to manufacturers and advocacy groups. But when pressed, all she could offer was an email she sent to other commissioners asking if they had suggestions for who to invite. McGuigan's response was blunt, and it landed. But like a white knight to the rescue, Senator Moore jumped in, spending several minutes scolding McGuigan and rushing to the defense of the commission, defending their integrity, apparently stunned that anyone would question his process. And the irony is that Moore's only proof of outreach was a single email he sent one time to Smith & Wesson, a company the legislator helped drive out of the state.
Donnie Bertham cut straight to the chase, asking whether the state's ethics commission had been contacted about a voting member, Lizotte, who stands to gain financially from the outcome of his own vote. Lipper Garabedian replied that since Lizotte had been, quote, transparent with the fact that he has a conflict of interest, they'd simply allow him to vote and make a note of the conflict in their final report. So it's all good. He's voting to give himself taxpayer money, but since we know about it, it's cool.
Now, after that, the meeting spiraled into disjointed debate, not over whether the tech even works, but how best to mandate it.
It doesn't.
And then there's Commissioner Ashford from MIT. What an absolute embarrassment.
Oh, that guy? Oh, yeah. Oh,
Showed up, waited until it was his turn to speak to start eating his lunch, barely got through his usual ranting without shoveling more food in his mouth, and then spent the rest of the meeting chiming in as he desired in between bites, talking with his mouth full and chewing away like he forgot he was on a state commission and not in his cafeteria. His sole concern, and he insists, people must be imprisoned for violating whatever legislation the commission decides. And in his own words, maybe that's more important than suicide.
That's what his concern is. Throw people in jail.
It is more important to put people in prison than to stop people from hurting themselves. But throughout it all, Senator Moore, the self-proclaimed pro-Second Amendment senator, sat smug, silent, and anytime someone praised the report, had nothing to say, but immediately jumped in to challenge, interrupt, or outright rebut anybody expressing concerns or opposition. So this wasn't a hearing. It was a performance, and they were going to stick to the script.
This is all over microstamping, a technology, and that they're modeling it on California's microstamping law, which, by the way, they abandoned in 2023 as unconstitutional.
It was brought up. It was brought up during the meeting. California tried to put this in 15 years ago, and they still haven't been able to do it.
Yeah.
So why is Massachusetts trying? And the answer was Massachusetts needs to lead the way
in mandating unworkable technology. What else do you say about that? I just don't even know.
Well, the next time the commission meets, the draft report will be a final report, and they will vote to present it to the legislature. And I'm sure the next legislative session will have some sort of language to put microstamping on the books.
I'm sure they're going to, thoroughly think it through, and it will be a well-considered report that says something like, this technology is unworkable. It's been proven unworkable, and we don't recommend adoption. Right? Is that what it's going to say?
Up until we don't recommend adoption. It's going to say it doesn't work. It's never worked. So therefore, we're going to mandate it on the people.
But we don't care, so they should do it. You got updates from south of the border, man. You guys, Rhode Island has lost its mind. I don't even know.
A lot has happened. So the previous episode, we recorded it on a Tuesday, and by the release date, things had changed, and so we're playing a little catch up here. But
how fast they can do something when they got those.
I know the highway,
special interest dollars.
The highway in front of the Providence Place Mall has been under construction since I've had a driver's license.
Right, they can't build a bridge in 20 years, but damn it, they can pass an assault weapons ban in 2 days.
So in our last episode, we discussed the proposed assault weapons ban moving through the Rhode Island legislature with just days left in their legislative session. At that point, the bill had passed the House and landed in the Senate Judiciary Committee, where it appeared to be headed for a 5-5 deadlock, effectively killing it before the June 20th deadline. But in true fashion, anti-civil rights groups mobilized fast, and the 10-member Judiciary Committee voted 8-6.
8-6.
Yes, you heard that correct. 8-6.
The 10-member committee voted 8-6
to advance an amended version of the bill to the Senate floor with just 48 hours to go. On the final day of the session, Friday, June 20th, the Senate passed it 25-11 with 2 no votes. So every vote in favor came from state Democrats.
Yep.
7 Democrats joined all 4 Republicans in voting no, and there were the 2 that didn't vote.
And I'm guessing every one of them had permission from leadership to do so.
Of course. The House then worked late into the night to get it passed before the midnight deadline, ultimately approving the amended version, 43-28, with 4 not voting.
Governor McKee, wasting no time at all, signed it into law on Thursday, June 26th, surrounded by, of course, leaders from Moms Demand Action and the Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence.
Don't miss the opportunity for the photo.
Yep, get the photo op.
The revised law is now titled the Unlawful Sale of Prohibited Firearms Act. It shrunk the original 9-page bill down to 4. Notably, it removes the ban on possession and eliminates the process for grandfathering firearms through the complicated registration process we talked about the previous episode.
Yep.
Though it also removed the provision where a grandfathered, and we'll put the air quotes around grandfathered, a grandfathered firearm could be willed to an heir. So that is out. Starting July 1st, 2026, It will be illegal in Rhode Island to manufacture, sell, offer for sale, transfer, or purchase a prohibited firearm. Violations will be punishable by up to 10 years in prison or a $10,000 fine and seizure of the firearm. So ultimately, you can still possess firearms you lawfully owned before that date, but you won't be able to transfer them to other Rhode Island residents, even as a gift or inheritance, unless the recipient is a federally licensed dealer. Your only other legal options will be selling out of state or surrendering them to law enforcement. Law enforcement agencies are exempt, of course.
Naturally.
But individual officers in their personal capacity are not. So expect some agencies to suddenly start declaring all their officers always on duty.
So the list of prohibited firearms, it's a pretty familiar list. We've seen this kind of stuff before. It kind of makes the rounds around the country. So semi-auto shotguns with fixed mags over 6 rounds, shotguns with revolving cylinders, semi-auto rifles with fixed mags over 10 rounds, excluding 22s. So semi-auto rifles that can accept a detachable mag and any one of the following features: a pistol grip or thumb hole stock, folding or telescoping stock, bayonet mount, grenade launcher, flash suppressor, threaded barrel, any type of barrel shroud that encircles or substantially encircles the barrel and allows the user to hold the firearm with the non-trigger hand without being burned. We'll come back to that. Semi-auto pistols with fixed mags over 10 rounds, any semi-auto firearm that accepts belt-fed ammo, and of course, the definitions are where it gets messy. But before we get to the actual definitions, so the single feature test, detachable mag and a pistol grip, covers 1 million different rifles. Detachable magazine and any sort of a barrel shroud that protects your hand from being burned covers another 1 million different types of rifles. So what kind of semi-automatic rifle is left?
There is not much. And because it says encircles or substantially encircles. So there's no definitive objective measure. It's simply left up to the personal feelings of whoever is prosecuting you for the crime.
So it would have to be a rifle of a rifle length that has nothing but barrel forward of the receiver.
We will see. This is certainly going to be one of those cases where we're going to have to see how it plays out in court. But the definitions are where it gets messy. So they define a folding or telescoping stock as anything that reduces any dimension of the firearm. So even an adjustable cheek riser will be considered banned. A detachable magazine includes...
my sights down.
A detachable magazine includes any feeding device removable without disassembling the firearm, or that can be removed using any basic tool or object used as a tool. And this does include end block clips.
So this is like the tube mag on your shotgun, the, integral magazines that can be removed with a screwdriver.
This says if it can be removed without disassembling the firearm. They did not define what disassembling means, though. Now, ironically, gun control advocates are now criticizing the bill, labeling it as the weakest assault weapons ban in the country, and they're already planning to push for stricter laws next session. They're particularly mad that the final version didn't keep the ban on possession, and Melissa Cardin, executive director of the Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence, even called it, I kid you not, she called it a legal loophole that despite federal law prohibiting sales of firearms to residents of a state where that firearm is prohibited, it's up to federal law enforcement to enforce it. They are claiming that is how far off the rails they've gone. They are calling federal law enforcement's responsibility for enforcing federal law a loophole.
You know what? This is like part of the script, though. It's like they'll pass some crap and then the gun control, the anti-gun people will come out. Some of them will say, oh, we're leading the way in this stuff, but we need to do more. And the other one will go, well, it doesn't go far enough. The point is always, no matter how you slice it or how you rationalize it, the point is always we need to make it worse.
Well, Governor McKee called it a historic day. When asked if he intended to push for a full ban in 2026, he said, I think the bill is really good progress, and I'm going to celebrate that today. And let's see what the impact is of this in terms of the objectives that were set. He went on to add that while the bill is still waiting to go into effect, they'll be consulting with other state governors who've passed similar legislation with aims to make Rhode Island leaders in the country. So buckle up, because the next session is going to be intense.
Yeah. So we want to pass more stuff, more restrictions, more bans, Did anybody bother asking or answering the question, when was the last time that Rhode Island had any sort of a...
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It's all about the bans, all about the restrictions, all about, the special interests and passing things that make people feel good, but don't have anything to do with actual crime.
Yeah, the Supreme Court's decision to deny cert in Snope v. Brown, and especially Ocean State Tactical v. Rhode Island, undeniably impacted how fast this legislation got pushed through.
Absolutely emboldened them.
So the anti-civil rights groups saw and see, past and present tense and future tense, those denials as a green light, obviously, to pass whatever they can. And it's a simple game. Get something on the books and then dare the court to have the guts to strike it down. So it's not hard to see this as setting the stage for a major constitutional showdown if the Supreme Court decides it's worth their attention. Mm-hmm. So Kavanaugh saying his statement respecting the denial of cert in Snope.
Yeah, we talked about last time.
He admits the court knows these laws raise serious questions and suggests maybe they'll take it up, in a year or two when we get to it. So what is that? Is that supposed to be a 2-minute warning? Nod to the lawmakers to pass what you can before we step in? Because that's how it's being read. And in the meanwhile, we, the people, suffer the effects of small-time politicians with big ambitions that aren't going to let that window close, especially when there's Bloomberg money on the table. So this is about fundraising. It has nothing to do with public safety. It's about what's going to put dollars in their pockets.
Of course. Then we have a completely spineless Supreme Court who can't be bothered to take up actual constitutional issues. We'll get around to it.
Maybe.
So a little bit of history. We're bridging the gap today between our revolutionary roots and the ongoing battle over civil rights to keep and bear arms. From the muskets that we won our freedom with to the legal challenges defining modern firearms ownership, it's all kind of connected. So we had earlier in the year the big run-up to the 250th anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord. The shot heard around the world. We're still a ways off from the 250th of the Declaration of Independence. That's next year, July 4th, 1776. By this point in 1775, however, the American Revolution's already well underway.
So after Lexington and Concord, the Second Continental Congress met in Philadelphia, and by June had officially formed the Continental Army and named George Washington as commander-in-chief. Around the same time, Fort Ticonderoga was taken from the British by a couple of guys named Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold. Mm-hmm. The British barely scraped out a win at the Battle of Bunker Hill, if you can call it that, considering they lost over 1,000 people.
Yeah, it's kind of a win.
It was a very expensive win.
That's a Pyrrhic victory.
But still, I mean, Congress gave one last kind of Hail Mary attempt at diplomacy. They sent the Olive Branch petition straight to King George III himself.
Yep.
Its author, John Dickinson, made it clear. So he said the colonies, listen, we're still loyal to the crown and we want a peaceful resolution under the British flag. But Parliament, he said, was the real problem. He said the Parliament was acting like a bunch of mini kings, handing down these punitive laws and treating their fellow Englishmen like second-class subjects. The colonies had grievances, sure. And yes, they had a willingness to fight because even in England, in law and cultural custom, an Englishman's home is his castle.
That's right.
So this was the colony's way of saying, hey, listen, we're loyal to you. Let's cut out the middle people who are creating all the problems. We're not the aggressors, and we want the world to see that we're making one last honest effort.
Obviously, we know the outcome of that. But point in fact is King George didn't just deny the petition. He refused to even read it. He'd already made up his mind, and the proclamation of rebellion had been signed and issued. As far as he was concerned, you don't flip off the crown in front of the entire world and then try to walk it back. He promised the belt, and the colonies were going to get the belt. And with that, there's really no going back. The colonists had but one way to go, and that's forward. Because there's only two outcomes when you're accused of treason. One is independence. The other one is the hangman's noose.
So last time we did a breakdown of the DOJ Civil Rights Division amicus brief in Barnett v. Raoul. It's an NRA-backed challenge to Illinois' so-called Protect Illinois Communities Act.
Yep.
That's their phrasing for their assault weapons ban. But as we talked about, the brief that was led by Assistant AG Harmeet Dillon got straight to the point. Banning firearms just because they look militaristic doesn't square with the Second Amendment. Not its text, not its history, not its tradition. Let's be clear. The Second Amendment wasn't written to protect duck hunting or target shooting. It exists
that's right.
so that the people, can access arms suitable for militia service, such that an armed citizenry can stand independent of the state. Heller confirmed it as an individual right in 2008. McDonald extended that protection to apply against state and local governments in 2010. Then in 2022, Bruin established the standard. Any restriction has to be evaluated based on the historical understanding of the right at the time it was ratified, not on what's politically convenient for the lawmakers today. Now, Rhode Island's hopping on that same tired bandwagon. Spin up fear, invent terms, push bans. Their logic is the firearms look too militaristic, but they can't even define what that means. It's the old,
it's convenient.
I know it when I see it standard. It's the same vague, nonsensical stuff the Supreme Court tossed out in the 1960s.
Yeah.
And really, I mean, like, we chuckle about it, but what's the obsession with bayonet lugs?
Yeah, right. You want to stab somebody with your rifle? Yeah.
Like, and since when is not burning your hand military grade technology?
That's right. Yeah, right. Military grade technology. The plain truth is that every firearm that exists or ever will exist can trace some part of its design back to a military firearm at some point in time. Just like all dogs come from wolves, that's how evolution works. But militaristic is a deliberately sloppy term made to shift the political winds and cast as wide a net as needed.
And let's not kid ourselves. What they're pushing is their old one drop rule repackaged as the single features test. You know, if a firearm has any features like one of them, it's automatically suspect. How does it function? Doesn't matter. How is it used? Don't care. Guilt by association. Sure, you know, some exceptions might be allowed for now, and maybe they even claim to have a friend. I have a friend that's a firearm owner, but one of the good ones, of course.
Naturally. But
to them, deep down, you simply don't belong in their more civilized society. The language is softer, but the thinking's the same. It's exclusion based on ignorance, dressed up as moral concern. But thankfully, the right to bear arms isn't frozen in time or shaped by their prejudice. It guarantees the people access to firearms suitable for defense, specifically those necessary to defend liberty and sovereignty at the time it needs defending. This isn't a partial right. It's all or nothing.
So with that in mind, we're stepping back. To understand where we are, we have to understand where we've been. We're taking a look back at the tools that built and maintained our freedom over the last 250 years. Walking through the lineage of American service rifles, the real standard issue tools carried by citizen soldiers from day one. And we're starting way back at the beginning with the Brown Bess and the Charleville musket. On June the 14th, 1775, just over 250 years ago, the Second Continental Congress issued a resolution. 6 companies of expert riflemen would be raised, 4 in Pennsylvania, 2 in Maryland, and 2 in Virginia. Once organized, they were to march north to join the Army near Boston, serving as light infantry under the Army's senior commander. This was the first formal authorization of what would become the Continental Army, an army force not raised by crown or empire, but by consent and will of the people. That order, by the way, was specifically for actual riflemen, not just general soldiers and musket bearers. It was actually for rifles, which made it kind of stand out for the time because it was unusual. And like John Adams wasn't exactly sure what a rifle was at the time. He's like, okay, that's cool, I guess. Let's go with it. In the 1600s and into the early 1700s, there was no universal standards for military firearms. Soldiers often carried firearms handed down from previous generations or the ones that they purchased themselves. They varied in caliber, construction, and quality, tailored more to one's personal and financial means than tactical doctrine. But as small arms, those carried by the individual soldier, became more influential on the battlefield. Nations began to rethink the power of consistency and standardization. Think of it like this. In the 1940s, Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox of the Nazi military, supposedly said a German Tiger tank was so superior it could take out 10 American Shermans. But the problem was that the Americans always had 11. Whether those were his exact words at the time or not, the reality is the same as in the 1700s. Industrial scale logistics would change the course of a war. Back in the 1700s, militaries used pattern muskets to standardize weapons across their forces. The government would commission a small batch of high-quality muskets to serve as reference models for manufacturing and quality control across multiple armories and manufacturers. Since they own the design, they could contract any manufacturer to build the same firearm, driving competition, keeping costs down. War was expensive then, too, so a better product at a better price was a big win. This was before the industrialization and standardization of interchangeable parts. This was the age of the pattern gun.
Yeah, and from the soldier's perspective, I mean, standardization could also mean survival. A standardized caliber meant ammunition supply could be predictable and streamlined. You had consistency in parts and construction, which meant soldiers could be taught how to perform routine maintenance, basic repairs in the field. So a broken ramrod no longer meant a useless firearm in need of a skilled craftsman. It meant the soldier grabbed a replacement from the supply officer, topped off on ammo, and kept going. So for the British Empire, the standard at the time that they were using was the Longland pattern musket, better known, though it wasn't officially named, the Brown Bess.
Better known to us.
Introduced in 1722, the Brown Bess became the backbone of British infantry for over a century. And the name never appears in official military records, but it was widely used by later in the 1700s, late 18th century. So the origins are uncertain. Commonly accepted folklore is soldiers, brown just referring to the distinctive color, whether it was the brown finish of the metal or the walnut stock. But Bess was sort of a less explicit term for a woman of ill repute.
A lady of the evening.
It was designed around the flintlock mechanism, which had proved to be more reliable and quicker to fire than the older matchlocks. Those are the ones where you had the little smoldering piece of rope that you had to keep going in the middle of battle when it could be raining. But the Brown Bess featured a 46-inch barrel, measured 62.5 inches in overall length, and weighed about 10.5 pounds. It fired an approximately 75 caliber round lead ball from a smooth bore, trading individual accuracy for collective speed on the reload. This was a tool reliant on massed volley rather than precision, so a unit of soldiers could act more like a massive multi-person shotgun, hurling hundreds of pounds of lead downrange in a volley. It wasn't accurate by modern standards, of course, but that wasn't the point. The Brown Bess was about discipline, it was about unity, and you could take the individual farmer or tradesman and turn them into a formidable line of fire that could speak with one voice.
Yeah, and military doctrine was different at the time, as it's been put. The target was not an enemy; it was the enemy. The idea was to overwhelm them with a volley of fire,
just a
rather
wall,
than picking off one guy at a time.
Now, in the American colonies, that was a voice that was familiar. So the British had long encouraged and often required free men to keep arms suitable for militia service in their homes. That was a normal thing.
Yeah, that was a thing.
In colonial America, the Longland pattern Brown Bess, it was cheap, it was reliable, it was available, and it was familiar to the common man. So even before the war began, this, we'll put the bunny quotes around it, the militaristic Brown Bess, that was a common sight. And they used it for everything, for defending your town, defending your home. It was used for hunting, civic duty. It was a multi-purpose thing. So just because it served one purpose doesn't mean that was its sole purpose. It held its own in the hands of American militias and newly formed Continental Army, but in 1778, another player joined the game. So with France entering the war as an American ally, French muskets began to arrive in increasing numbers. Chief among them was the Charleville musket, and that was named after the Royal Armory in Charleville, Messer, however it's pronounced.
Something like that.
Something French, which is northeast of Paris. So this was first standardized back in 1717, one of the earliest government-issue pattern muskets in Europe. And although Charleville muskets were also manufactured in Toul and Saint-Étienne, Charleville became the generic term used by American soldiers, probably just because it was a simple association, and probably just because that was the easiest French word they could pronounce.
And if you have a mind to dig deeper into this particular aspect of things, the shell companies and like the backhanded like maneuvering that the French had to go through in order to set up these fake companies in order to supply the Americans with gunpowder and guns during the Revolution is actually a really cool story to listen to. But that's a different topic. The most common variant that was supplied to American forces was the Model 1763 or 66. Like Brown Bess, it was the flintlock smoothbore musket, but was slightly smaller and lighter. It fired a 69 caliber round ball, allowing soldiers to carry more ammunition for the same weight without sacrificing too much in effectiveness on the battlefield. The barrel measured roughly 44 3/4 inches with an overall length of around 60 inches, and it weighed 10 pounds. That half-pound difference may not seem like much to you and I, but on long marches, grueling campaigns, walking through rivers, etc., that's going to matter. People had to walk everywhere, carrying everything they needed as a soldier, including those heavy muskets and those heavy lead balls, and any hiker will tell you that every ounce matters. The Charleville was also well built, sturdy, reliable, regarded by many as superior to its British counterpart. It would go on to inspire the design of America's first domestically produced standard musket, the Springfield Model 1795.
So now you have two muskets, kind of each with its own history and its own legacy, fighting side by side for the American military. The Brown Bess was kind of this symbol of empire and loyalty. The Charleville was more of a revolution and alliance, but both would play significant roles in shaping the identity of the American fighting soldier. But not all colonial arms or foreign lineage.
That is correct.
So across the colonies, local gunsmiths produced what became known as Committee of Safety muskets. And they earned that name because they were often funded by local governments to protect their community. Imagine that. Towns in Massachusetts paying for and issuing firearms to its people.
What?
Crazy.
Yeah.
These firearms sometimes varied widely in design and quality, lacked some of the standardization of the European arms, but still they reflected something more deeply American, the ingenuity born of necessity.
There are so many different styles of musket and rifle early on because, as you said before, there's no like standardization on stuff. So every town had a gunsmith on the main crossroads, and if they happened to be the kind of gunsmith that made guns, then, you know, it would be whatever they made, and it may not conform to a pattern. I mean, these are the days when they had to hand turn their own screws, you know. So
you got what you got.
Yeah, that's right. You get what you get.
But there were also rifles, particularly the Pennsylvania rifle, which later became known as the Kentucky long rifle after its use on the western frontiers. Those were typically 40 to 48 caliber. Unlike smoothbore muskets, they had rifled barrels cut with spiraling grooves down the length of the bore that spun the ball for a dramatic improved accuracy. I mean, several times over. Swiss and German gunsmiths in Pennsylvania had been making the rifles since the early 1700s, but they were originally meant for hunting. Their long barrels and tight-fitting rounds made them slow to load and more expensive to produce, thus their relative lack of production as, you know, like a military arm would be. They couldn't mount bayonets, and they required more training to use effectively in combat. But in the hands of a skilled sharpshooter, such as Daniel Morgan's riflemen at Saratoga and Cowpens, they were devastatingly effective when used to their strengths. They brought a new dimension to the battle space and to that arena with the ability to target and eliminate officers in the command structure and disrupting formations from well outside British musket range. George Washington saw their limits. He pushed for rifles to serve in very specialized roles only. So he saw some value in it, but preferred the uniformity and speed of musket fire for the line infantry. And hey, you know, it's hard to get a tiger to change their stripes. But still, they came to symbolize a frontier spirit. It was about precision, patience, and a fierce American independence.
As the Revolutionary War began to draw to a close, Brown Bess and Charleville remained the most widely used arms. They continued to serve into the War of 1812, eventually phased out by the Springfield Model 1795, a musket that synthesized French design with American ambition. But Long before that, these muskets had done something much more profound than that. They became symbols. The Brown Bess was a symbol of order, discipline, and unity. The Charleville, meanwhile, liberty, alliance, and transformation. And the Pennsylvania, Kentucky rifle, individualism, skill, and a rebellious spirit. And in the hands of a citizen soldier, any one of them could be something greater. Not just a weapon, but a tool of change, a declaration of identity, a signal that a people were ready to define themselves on their own terms and by their own fire.
Today's so-called militaristic firearms are just, they're a continuation. They're the latest step in a lineage that began with the Brown Bess and the Charleville. They're not niche. They're not exotic. They were not abnormally dangerous or unusual. They were the standard arms of a free people chosen not for decoration, not for aesthetics, but for defense, duty, and survival. Their legacy lives on in every rifle built for reliability, adaptability, effectiveness in the hands of a citizen. The aesthetics may change, but the purpose remains the same, to ensure that, we the people, with capital W, capital T, capital P, we the people, not just the rich and powerful, remain capable of standing their ground in defense of liberty. So that's all for this installment. If you enjoy the dive, leave us a comment, share with someone who loves history and the Second Amendment, and stay tuned, because the next time we pull this around, we're going to be marching into the era of the Springfield 1795. But until then, keep your powder dry.
So in defense of caliber, just while we're sitting here, by the way, I was doing a little bit of math on the side because it fascinates me to do this kind of stuff. And the trend towards smaller caliber was interesting to me when I first started reading about it, and so you start researching it. So if you think about the Brown Bess, right? Big, heavy caliber. Well, it's 3/4 of an inch round ball. Whereas the rifles, the Kentucky rifle, .48? It's a lot smaller, and that stuff respects the cube law. So I did a little bit of math, and you can get, out of a pound of lead, for 0.75 inch diameter balls, you can get 11. Out of that same pound of lead at 0.48 inches in diameter, you can get 42 lead balls. So it's 42 shots instead of 11, with the concomitant reduction in the amount of powder that you have to use to move those things. You could see that it becomes important for people in the backwoods, and because the Brown Bess, they were great big balls, but who cares? It was backed by the most well-supplied and stocked army in the world. So what did they care? They had supply chains of wagons bringing more ammunition to the front, so they could afford to maintain these huge balls and stick with them.
Well, and plus, the ability to manufacture things smaller and more precise is something that takes time and money and energy and effort. Yeah. And the Pennsylvania rifles were more of not bespoke, but they were made with much more care. But it was designed around the idea of, you're not firing volleys.
Yeah, it was accuracy over...
It was accuracy over volume.
Yeah. Yeah, which is actually, according to the military doctrine of the time, it was actually a disadvantage when it came to unit tactics. But the rifle was more suited to the individual, or the very small unit like Morgan's riflemen.
Yeah, it wasn't meant for open field battle of group of 100 versus group of 100.
Going muzzle to muzzle at 100 yards. Yeah. So that's actually going to do it for today. Thanks for listening to the Goal Podcast. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the show, share it with friends. Check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/Goal Podcast MA, on YouTube at The Goal Podcast, or on X at Goal Update.
If you'd like to preserve your Second Amendment civil rights, join Goal today by visiting goal.org and clicking the Join Renew button on the top of the homepage.
If you have a topic you think we should cover, if there's something going on in your club or town, or if you have a question for the mailbag, shoot us an email at goalpodcast@goal.org.
Thanks again for listening. Stay informed, stay engaged, and as always, stay free. The Goal Podcast is a production of Gun Owners Action League of Massachusetts. The views and opinions expressed are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of Goal, its staff, or affiliates.